You will not believe what just happened. A UK government minister has quit his job because his mortgage payments went up from £800 to £2,000 a month and he couldn't afford to pay it on his ministerial salary. I know, incredible, right? His ministerial salary, by the way, was £118,300. There is just so much wrong with this that I had to share my thoughts, and apologies to anyone with sensitivity to bad language or direct talking. There will be some in this video, so you might want to switch over to watch a video with cute fluffy kittens instead. So, we have this guy called George Freeman, a Conservative MP who was the Minister of State for Science, Research and Innovation before resigning in November 2023. And yes, this is not the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. You know, this guy is just a lowly minister, but unfortunately in politics, especially in government, if you can't take the heat, please get the fuck out of the kitchen. And Mr. Freeman has voted with the government in 99%, I checked, of the roughly 2,500 votes since he entered Parliament. When he resigned, he said it was to focus on my health, family, well-being and life beyond the front bench. But we just found out the real reason. On his Substack, George Freeman posted this article called "Why We Need a Cross-Party Consensus for Long-Term Policy to Unlock the Value of UK Science, Technology and Innovation." And in the middle of that article, he wrote, "In November, I stood down, having served in 5 front bench roles under 4 prime ministers. Why did I stand down? Blah blah, I've done a lot of stuff. Also, I was so exhausted, bust and depressed that I was starting to lose the irrepressible spirit of optimism, endeavor and teamwork and progress, which are the fundamentals of human achievement." Okay, so some reference to being burnt out and perhaps mental health issues. That's fair, that's a fair reason. And because my mortgage rises this month from £800 per month to £2,000, which I simply couldn't afford to pay on a ministerial salary. That's political economy 2.0. We're in danger of making politics something only hedge fund donors, young spin doctors and failed trade unionists can afford to do. So according to this guy who earned £118,300 and had a mortgage of £800 a month, the fact that his mortgage went up from £800 to £2,000 meant that he could no longer afford it. First up, just talking about the numbers. A salary of £118,300 is equivalent to £6,230 a month after tax. The maximum that an MP can contribute to their final salary pension is 11.9%. And yes, unlike the rest of the country, MPs in the UK still get a final salary pension scheme because of course they only make the rules, they don't have to follow the rules. Duh! So even if George Freeman contributed the maximum of 11.9%, his take-home pay would be £5,784 a month, and George lives in a household with 2 incomes because according to Wikipedia he is married to Fiona Laird, who is a theatre and TV director. So we have someone who makes about 4 times the average salary in the UK who apparently cannot afford the increase in his mortgage payment. His mortgage is roughly 33% of his take-home pay, which is below average, and yet apparently he got divorced and he has kids from his previous marriage and the school fees and whatever. Let me get out the tiniest of my violins for this particular sub-story. The divorce rate in the UK is 42%. There are many, thousands and millions of people not making £118,000 a year who also have the same exact problems. If a government minister on a salary that puts them into the top 2.5% of people in the UK cannot afford to pay his mortgage, what is everybody else meant to do? How are they meant to put a roof over their heads? Everybody else can't just go and quit being a minister and then land a cushy 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever non-exec jobs that take advantage of the fact that you are in Parliament and in government. Take advantage of your connections. Because according to his own Substack, the day after I handed in my red box and said goodbye, I suddenly had circa 70 hours a week I didn't have before. So after he resigned as a minister, he apparently found a magic 70 hours a week that he doesn't have to do work anymore. Except, wait, after he resigned from being a government minister, George Freeman still has the full-time job of being an MP, which pays a salary of £86,584 a year. But of course, representing your constituents, deciding on the laws of the country, reading all the legislation, working for the good and benefit of the country as an elected representative, as a member of parliament, is, according to the dipshits in parliament, only a part-time job. You've got it right. Because if you found 70 hours a week of free time, you cannot possibly be spending very much time working as an MP. There's only so many hours in the day. In the UK, MPs are allowed to take on second jobs, third jobs, fifth jobs, 10th jobs that pay them a boatload of money for nondescript, confusing advice that consumes very little of their time, because they are an MP. It's basically a legalized form of corruption. So it is financially better for someone to not be a minister, to stay being an MP and take on these second jobs that pay what are effectively bribes. Because why else would a company hire someone who has connections in government, knows all the right people, but already apparently has a full-time day job, so they can't spend very much time working for you. They can't commit time to your business. There is very little actual work that they can produce, right? Well, you'd think so. According to official parliament records, in the whole of last year, in the entirety of 2023, George Freeman spoke in parliament on only 10 days. He also submitted 0 written questions. In fact, he has only ever submitted 1 question in the 14 years that he has been in Parliament. So I guess, being paid £86,500 is only enough for a small part-time job as an MP. Why waste your time actually doing your work? But the real problem is the increase in the mortgage payment. His mortgage went up from £800 to £2,000, and that means that his mortgage is relatively new. It has a long term to go, because that sort of an increase means that there is still quite a long period of time, or it's some kind of part interest only or interest only mortgage. But the thing is, it isn't a very huge mortgage. If you assume a term of, say, 25 years for the sake of argument, and an interest rate of, say, 4.5% at the moment, paying £2,000 a month means that you have a £360,000 mortgage. The median house price in the UK, according to the Land Registry, is £285,000. So it's a bit higher, but it's not a million miles away. There are millions of people in this country earning much less, and several times less, who have the same exact problem with their mortgage, and they also have circumstances, money issues. And they can't just go and, take on cushy second jobs because they are not a lazy scumbag lowlife MP. And actually, they have to do their work in order to get paid. I know, unfathomable. The fact is, this guy was a government minister. He is literally directly complicit as part of that group in the UK government doing fuck all to solve this problem. Now he's whining on his Substack about being unable to afford to pay his mortgage. It is baffling how incredibly stupid you have to be to act like this. What is this, like a petulant child? Does he not understand politics? He's been in there long enough. It's like taking a shotgun, aiming it at your foot, shooting yourself in the foot with the shotgun, and then complaining that there is a gaping fucking hole in your foot. At the same time, yesterday the Bank of England published some new data, and all the headlines from the mass media are celebrating. UK mortgage approvals at 6-month high as average rate falls for the first time since late 2021, says the Financial Times. If you're wondering what this amazing increase looks like on a chart, here is the chart. This increases the last point on the right, and you can clearly see that this chart proves conclusively that this increase is a cause for popping champagne. Things are on the up. Meanwhile, the Bank of England publishes other data as well, but this data is a lot harder to find because it's not publicly announced, it's not in the press release, it's not really published anywhere unless you're digging to find it. Here is the consumer credit growth rate table, and you can see that in December, credit card debt was going up at 12.7% year on year because people can't afford to pay for shit, and in order to feed their kids, pay their electricity bill, continue to be able to survive, they are resorting to using credit cards despite the very high interest rates. So what is the government doing to try and fix the UK mortgage crisis? Well, apparently Rishi Sunak is planning to introduce new 99% mortgages backed by the government. The idea is that people who can't afford to save money for a deposit, or people who choose not to prioritize saving money for a deposit, can still go and get themselves a mortgage. This is meant to encourage people who rent to go out and buy a house instead. You can immediately see the actual idea here and the problem. If you artificially create a load of new demand because suddenly a whole load of people who couldn't buy a house can now buy a house without needing to save for the house, then house prices will stay high, maybe even go up. And that is apparently what everyone really cares about. What's the house price going to do? Against the flow of what's actually happening in the economy. But while we're at it, why not go all the way? Why not offer 120% mortgages so that the mortgage can then pay for your legal fees, pay for your stamp duty, and you'll have enough left over to redecorate your house? What could possibly go wrong, am I right? In addition, Rishi Sunak has told lenders to allow anyone who is struggling to pay their mortgage to only pay the interest on the mortgage for 6 months. During those 6 months, you will have repaid none of the principal balance, which means that it will take you years longer to repay your mortgage, and you will pay thousands more in interest overall. But that's data, that's numbers, and we all know it's unfair to use data and numbers to show how incredibly pathetic and dumb these policies are. But here is the next policy. If after those 6 months of interest-only payments, you are still struggling because, nothing's changed, the only thing that's changed is that you are going to have to pay a lot more debt, your payments go back up and you can't actually afford to pay them, don't worry. You can now remortgage your 25-year mortgage to a 40-year one so that your payments are a little bit less per month, but don't you worry about the fact that this means you'll pay almost twice as much in interest. That is not important. If you take out a 40-year mortgage on a £285,000 house, which is the median house price in the UK, you'll pay about £140,000 extra in interest repayments. So that's about half the price of the house that you're buying extra. And if you earn a median salary of £33,000, that extra interest is equal to about 5.5 years of your salary after tax and pension deductions. So yeah, it sounds like a complete no-brainer to take out that 40-year mortgage, right? On an average house, your mortgage will drop from £1,584 to just £1,281. So that's £300 a month cheaper. But you will also have to work an extra 5 years just to pay for the difference in interest. So every single pound during those 5 years goes towards paying that interest. The solutions that the UK government have put in place are pathetic. They are disgusting. They smell, they reek of how little the government in the UK care for the plight of the people that they are meant to serve. The fact that a UK government minister has quit his £118,000 job because he can't afford his mortgage payment shows how incredibly bad the situation is. The government chose to sit around, sucking their thumbs, fucking around instead of doing their job. They could have banned short-term teasers or mortgages immediately. Why does everyone in the UK remortgage every 2 to 5 years? It makes no sense. Well, it does make sense because it means that you can pay the bank a £2,000 remortgage fee every single time, every few years. And when your prime minister just happens to have worked in the bank and all the other government ministers have all of these connections to the banksters, it makes a whole lot more sense. In the US, mortgages are typically fixed for periods of 30 years. So unless you're moving house, interest rate changes are irrelevant because your payment is fixed once you buy the house until you choose to remortgage or the mortgage is repaid. A bit like how loans work. It also means that mortgage rates are a lot more steady because they average out over long periods of time when interest rates fluctuate up and down. It means that when interest rates are really low, nobody goes and gets a ridiculously cheap 0.8 or 1% interest mortgage. And it also means when rates go up, you don't suddenly have this huge problem with people not being able to afford their mortgage payment completely out of the blue. The government could choose to underwrite all or part of the risk of the interest rate fluctuations on these mortgages so that the 30-year mortgage rates would be reasonably cheap to consumers. This would work a lot better and cost a lot less than the shit that they're currently trying to come up with. Well, they're not really coming up with anything much. They're just sticking things, putting a plaster over a plaster that's already over another plaster. What about fixing the supply chain? Today, brand new regulations come into play at the UK border, which will add a small mountain of paperwork and a boatload of bureaucratic bullshit to things like food coming in from Europe. Since Brexit, the UK has signed a handful of negligible trade deals with countries that have very little trade with the UK, and this is being positioned as a massive win by the UK government, while trade with Europe is suffering. The truth is, since the vote in 2016, the government completely fucked up, took their eye off the ball on Brexit negotiations, too busy deciding who should be the Prime Minister this week, and now we're all paying the price with our economy.